Okay, my English teacher friend. So I'm excited about this writing workshop, and there's a backstory in terms of the impetus and the inspiration behind it, and it begins like this. So one of my summer school students, so real reluctant, struggling, emerging writer, junior, failed the New York State Regents exam back in June, is in summer school with me, and he speaks by way of baseball analogy sometimes. So we were introducing rhetorical analysis to the students, and I started with a Frederick Douglass speech. And he said, "Dude, Coon, you know, you're asking me to do Major League Baseball kind of stuff, and I never even played modified baseball before. Can you dumb it down? Can you simplify it? Can you give me something a little bit more bite-sized than this speech because it's confounding and really confusing and I'm having a hard time?" And I'm like, yeah, that's true, man. We hurl the high heat at these kids typically when we introduce things like synthesis and rhetorical analysis and put them on the Major League Baseball squad with outdoing without doing modified JV, varsity, single A, double A, triple A, and just we're like suit up and you're on the Major League Baseball team. So we began to brainstorm ways to simplify it and ease our way by, introduction into the expository mode of rhetorical analysis. And I looked up love letters, and I found one that's really fantastic. So it's an eighth grade Star Wars fan love letter to this girl Jessica in his class, and I'll show you that uh, piece right now. So it's kind of hard to find, and I found it on Reddit. But if you want me to send it to you, if you're having a hard time locating it, I'm more than happy to. So it reads like this: Dear Jessica, you've asked me to stop writing these letters. You've told me they will never change things between us, but I can't, Jessica. I can't just let you go. Now, note the syntax in here, it's very interesting. Even Darth Vader, an evil Sith Lord, couldn't leave his son to die at the end of the Return of the Jedi. You make me feel so safe, Jessica, so warm. I want to crawl up inside you, like Luke Skywalker crawled up inside the Tauntaun to protect himself from the sub-zero temperatures of Hoth, where the Rebel Alliance was hiding from the Galactic Empire. For you, Jessica, I would dive into the Sarlacc pit of Tatooine, Luke's home planet, and be slowly digested for 1,000 years like the bounty hunter Boba Fett. Even though in the expanded universe of the Star Wars novels, Fett eventually escapes, which creator George Lucas has accepted as official S-dub canon, but my simile still stands. Please, Jessica, give you and me a try, or as a wise Jedi once said, try not, do or do not, there is no try. Come on, Jessica, let's do it, let's French. Then again, maybe you're right, maybe we're from different galaxies far, far away from one another. Maybe you're not the droid I'm looking for, and I should give up and move along with my heart. May the force be with you, Patrick, third row history. And I really love that piece. There's a lot there. And one of the things I've done is created Plato's Plato discussion with my leading questions to get students to probe the text a little deeper and build the reading skills that are requisite for purposes of tearing apart a text for rhetorical analysis. And I will post that to the YouTube channel after I make this video. So for this one, I'm going to walk teachers and students through how to write the introductory paragraph to ensure that they're anchored in a thesis statement. And, we'll pull the strings of my template as always, the declarative and the inverted thesis, and then we'll tackle the body paragraph syllogistically. So status quo. So, new expository mode, new essay, new text, but that's the glory of the templates. They're universal and can be used every single time with small adaptation. So, one of the things that I always emphasize is this with teachers, you got to Bob Ross your instruction. And what I mean by that is paint a couple of exemplars and models for your students. So show them how to manipulate. In this case, since we're doing rhetorical analysis, we're going to declare the thesis. You don't want to invert for rhetorical analysis, and I'll show you that in just a second. So show them, two or three. You position yourself as the expert writer in the classroom and you get right up to that easel and canvas and demonstrate, illustrate for them specifically how to do it, just as Bob Ross would, right? You just can't talk into the ether about the theory and the technique of composition and rhetorical analysis. It's a show me versus tell me discipline. So the first question we have is this: how do I write the introductory paragraph? And as always, we have two options. We can declare or invert the thesis. But first, one of the things that you'll see, especially, it doesn't even matter if it's if students doing rhetorical analysis for the purposes of AP language where we typically see it, or they're doing rhetorical analysis, say in a sophomore gen ed class. There are two implicit questions in any prompt, no matter how you phrase it, if it's a good prompt. And it's what is the authorial intent? So in AP language, we talk about exigence, and I use that term with sophomores, juniors, gen ed. They can grasp it. And then how does the author construct meaning? And for those of you that are familiar with my work, you're noticing, hopefully, that I ask those same two questions for literary analysis. So there's a lot of overlap, right? And that's the thing: pattern, pattern, pattern. Demystify the process. Do things with consistency and regularity. Have a disciplined, uniform approach, and it will really, really unravel how to do this for students. And one of the things that when I push into districts and work with students, I see teachers assign a writing task even to seniors, or college freshmen, and they look at that blank sheet of paper or their screen as if they've never written an essay before. And that always is problematic for me. Students should, especially at that grade level, intuitively, instinctually know how to tackle a written task. And with templates and modeling and Bob Rossing, then that opportunity affords itself. So in my classroom, I have a poster that looks like this, and it's the high flyer rhetorical terms and devices that appear in our reads over and over and over again. And especially with rhetorical analysis, I really think students need to read a lot, because what happens, at least in my classroom, is that the writing takes care of itself because students know that they're going to be using the templates, and they just follow the same pattern every time they write. Where they go astray and where the snafus come in is misinterpretation in the reads, how to ascertain meaning. So I do a lot of short passages with my students, a lot of short speeches, letters, things of that nature, and practice, practice, practice the reading, and they'll see that these terms and devices reappear over and over and over again. So the trick in the read is to find the three most salient terms and or devices in the piece. And in the Plato's discussion video that I'm going to make for this Dear Jessica letter, we'll go over how to read that letter. For now, I'm just going to show you how to write about it. So let's take a look at a few introductions, and I'll tell you how it breaks down. So students are going to declare the thesis, which means that right out of the gate, you're going to drop the thesis. All right. So ultimately, what we're going to do for introductions for rhetorical analysis is highlight the three most germane terms and or devices in the piece. Oftentimes when I read rhetorical analysis introductions, they read like literary term or rhetorical terms dumping grounds. Student just like dumps a whole bunch of terms and devices in there and says, "Kada, I have a thesis." I like context and background. So what my students are going to do is the same as always, right? So you have to have some context and background. Don't plot summarize. You're going to see a good academic tone in terms of using tier 2 level vocabulary. So your average run-of-the-mill SAT level words. And then they're going to be manipulating their syntax. So I espouse rule number 18 that Strunk and White put out there, that there's 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. So you should see my students achieving a certain voice rhythm and flow, because out of the gate, I want them getting more than just the thesis point. I want them getting the pizzazz, the wow, the sophistication point as well. So look at how this flows here. Declare the thesis. Out of the gate, just go for it. Desperate and at times cringeworthy, Patrick's plea for requited love belies the fact that he's just an 8th grade kid trying too hard to win a girl over. Drawing frequent reference to Star Wars, he juxtaposes classic film scenes to his longing for a relationship with Jessica in a bumbling and awkward manner. Clearly of the nerdy type, Patrick struggles to build his suave in a convincing enough manner to yield the results he desires. Even his syntax cannot conceal the fact that this young Romeo has a lot to learn about the art of winning a girl over. So for those of you that are familiar with my work, you're seeing yet again exactly 4 sentences, right? And ultimately what my student is focusing on are the 3 salient terms. So they implied ethos, right? Patrick has this ethos, and that's really crucial. He's just an 8th grader trying to woo this girl in the most awkward manner possible. So the ethos, the syntax, and then the allusion, right, to Star Wars. So those are the 3 terms and or devices that this student is focusing on to anchor the thesis. So you can see that the vocab is up without sounding too pedantic. We don't want kids to sound contrived or pretentious or get out of their wheelhouse. So the student has really good command of their vocab, but look at that teeter-totter balance that I always talk about between the colloquial and the vernacular. Words like bumbling and cringeworthy, right? So I really like it when my students can, bring in some colloquial and vernacular and teeter-totter balance that with the academic. So, you drop some terms, drop some devices to anchor the thesis, 4 sentences, sentence constructs, and tier 2, and voila, you have a really good solid foundation upon which to write the rest of the essay. So here's another one. Lead with the most salient term and or device. Like most 8th graders would, Patrick fumbles mightily in his attempt to win over the object of his desire through his awkward phrasing and bizarre ethos. Do you see that there? So get focused on the most important terms and or devices. So in most cases, my students said the ethos. You really got to focus on the fact that this kid's very young, trying to speak the language of love. Clearly an ardent Star Wars fan, he fails to see that his allusions are not helping him to advance a clear expression of the magnitude of his love. So going in order, we have ethos, we have allusion, right? And ideally, I want my students to have 3. Instead, his constant hammering of these parallels simply renders him as being a mere boy who's trying too hard. In spite of this, Patrick's syntactical maneuvering shows skill, although this too proves to be to his own demise. So syntax is the 3rd term. So this is how my students do their rhetorical analysis introductions. So declare the thesis, drop the 3 most salient relevant terms and or devices, sprinkle in the tier 2, get a little colloquial, get a little vernacular, but look at the sentence constructs that my students are able to do. Take a look at the last one as an example. To get the sophistication point, you really got to be tricky with your syntax from time to time and break away from what struggling and emerging writers often do, which is stack independent clauses atop of each other, or the short simple declarative sentence. So they go short simple declarative followed by short simple declarative followed by short simple declarative. So you have that parallelism, which is chop 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 in terms of the arrangement of the flow. So to get the voice, the pizzazz, the rhythm, you got to do things like this. In spite of this, comma, Patrick's syntactical maneuvering shows skill, dash, although, comma, this too, comma, proves to be of his own demise. So some complexity every now and then really bodes well for the students. And I'm a big believer of this. And I talk to AP readers, my fellow colleagues. At the end of the introduction, the reader knows where the essay is going. And I think in the two examples we've seen, any AP reader would say, yep, this kid's going to get the sophistication point if they can carry this throughout the remainder of the essay. This is really good writing and quite stellar. So here's one more. Eighth grade boys are awkward to begin with, but couple this with trying to woo over girls who are out of one's league, and rhetorically, things can get pretty messy. With a big love for Jessica and an equally big love for Star Wars, Patrick tries to give voice to the former through his continual allusions. The logical and emotional thread. So you'll see my students imply their terms. So by saying logical, it's logos, emotional, pathos. I don't like it when my students say, the logos and pathos. It's better to imply, it's more conversational. So the logical and emotional thread between his two infatuations gets lost in the awkwardness of his diction and his inability to rein in his big plea. Even though Patrick falters and sputters, his ability to manipulate his syntax to further his cause is admirable. So yet again, this student's doing the exact same thing with the template. Declare the thesis, sprinkle in the three most salient terms, and so they got ethos, illusion, and syntax. That's what we decided upon in our Plato's Plato discussion as being the three most important. The juxtapositions are big as well, but that you move those into the bit paragraphs, the bit part paragraphs, to cover the totality of the piece. Always four sentences. Manipulate the syntax for voice, rhythm, and flow. Get some tier 2 in there. Work on a little colloquial vernacular, and voila, you got yourself a pretty solid foundation. And again, just look at the sentence flow here. It's really advanced and really nice for a student to do this. But you got to be working word study academies and nuance academies from day one in order for this to happen, because most students don't come to you in the fall writing like this. So next question is, how do I write the body paragraphs? And for those of you that are familiar with my work, you're going to say, holy cow, this guy's not lying. It's absolutely true. We are going to do the syllogistic method yet again. And for those of you that are new with my work, I'll give you a real quick overview, a real quick synopsis of the syllogistic method. If you go into my YouTube channel, I have several videos where I do deep dives into this and talk about inductive and deductive reasoning. Probably the videos that go deep into this are the ones that feature if you give a mouse a cookie, and P.D. Eastman's Are You My Mother? So this is complicated stuff, and I coupled the teachings with children's literature for it to be less intimidating and more accessible. So I used If You Give a Mouse a Cookie and Are You My Mother? And those videos are in my YouTube channel, which are pretty cool in terms of talking about how to sustain line of reasoning and proceed through arguments syllogistically. So check those out. So in brief, the syllogistic method comes from the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, And the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, and they would throw out these grandiose topics, these big essential questions. And for those of you that are familiar with Platonic, Socratic, Aristotelian work, you might be familiar with the text Plato's Republic, where they hurl out the question, "What is justice?" And these great philosophical think tankers step to the mic and they drop these definitions of what justice is. And if you break it down, each time someone steps to the mic to give some definitive answer on the nature of justice, they're dropping syllogisms, and all it is a mathematical, computative, cogent way to structure an argument, and it proceeds from premise to conclusion. So if I were to say, first premise, arsenic is deadly, we'd nod our heads and say, "Yep, that's true, Christian. You're right." And then I say, "Ugh, my dog ate arsenic." We would be drawing our conclusion here because it's just logical. Our dog might die, can't eat arsenic. That's not good. And when our students argue, we want them to be this lockstep in their arguments, and be this deliberate and kind of computative. And oftentimes what happens is students pretty much only present a second premise, and that's when and why we see a shift away from them performing rhetorical analysis to plot analysis. They get really plot summative. So even in rhetorical analysis, oftentimes when we read College Board sample papers, they read like a Cliff Note summation of the speech or the letter, because students just want to retell the story of what they're supposed to be analyzing. So to make sure that students are, meeting the demands of the assignment and performing rhetorical analysis from start to finish, we're going to make sure that they go syllogistically. In terms of what this looks like for the purposes of rhetorical analysis, the first premise is exactly what the first premise in literary analysis is going to be doing, except that you're using rhetorical terms and devices instead of literary terms and devices. This is amazing when students realize this, because most of the time ELA teachers focus on literary analysis. I think rhetorical analysis just has a bit part in a kid's like general education, unless they take AP language. And it's like, hey guys, all you're doing is switching up your terms a little bit, to a rhetorical focus versus a literary focus, but the execution is going to be the same. So the first premise is going to be exactly 3 sentences long, and it's going to be an argument containing the terms and or devices. Second premise is static. Everything else is status quo. Textual support, teeter-totter balance, the quoting and the paraphrasing. The conclusion, keep the promise of the first premise. So you got to go link back, promise, echo the thesis, and tie it all back with the textual analysis. And students always ask me this, if the introductory paragraph is 4 sentences long, what's up your sleeve, Mr. Kuhn? How many sentences should a syllogistic body paragraph be? And no matter the expository mode, we're shooting for 10 sentences, do not exceed 12. So there has to be an organizational structure to the writing. And for rhetorical analysis, especially for AP Lang, I want my students doing 4 paragraphs. So intro, 2 bodies, and a conclusion. So I'm going to show you how to do one of the body paragraphs, the first body paragraph, and then I'll talk about how to transition into the second body paragraph in just a second. But I like cogency. I like it when students stay really disciplined and organized. So students often ask, where do I begin? How do I begin? And you'll notice here with my cursor, I tell my students to begin where Patrick begins. Begin where the author begins. So I like these transitions right here, right from the onset. So you're cueing the reader that you have an organizational sequence, that you are going to be a disciplined writer, and then you just methodically move through the piece, and cross-weave, cross-analyze when necessary. So as I alluded to earlier, the first premise is going to be 3 sentences long. Argue with your terms. So let's look at this. Right from the onset, Patrick acknowledges the logical roadblock of his endeavor. So we're going to focus on the logos. Jessica has already rebuffed him hard and apparently has asked him firmly to cease his pursuit of her. So again, we're doing the same thing here as the introduction. Focus on those sentence constructs. Focus on that vocab. I like rebuffed him hard, right? That blend of the academic and the colloquial. So we got logos and we got a little bit of ethos in there. Now we're moving on to the syntax. Syntactically, the arrangement of short, simple declarative sentences speak to this fact while also revealing his desperation to get her to change her mind. In order to highlight the utter sincerity of his emotional plea, so now we're into pathos, Patrick cannot but help himself to juxtapose his longing for Jessica to his ardent passion for all things Star Wars. So we got a loaded first premise here, and this is what I tell my students. You got to multitask. Otherwise, you're going to run out of time if you're doing this in a test situation. And it's just not skillful to have one paragraph ethos, one paragraph logos, one paragraph syntax, one paragraph allusion. So you got to be able to tie and synthesize these things together. So if we put this in the language of a promise, because I tell my students the first premise is a promise, we got a whole bunch of terms that we're going to be looking at here. So we got logos. We have, by extension, you have to talk about ethos, syntax, a little bit of pathos, and this juxtaposition, which is the allusion. So go in order of the way you listed them. So let's see how this goes. Fourth sentence begins the second premise right here. And I tell my students, get quoting and paraphrasing. Get your nose into the text. And I like this because students oftentimes immediately start quoting the text, but they don't have an argument. And then, therefore, hence, they are not performing rhetorical analysis. They're doing plot synopsis. So this is good. We've set up our argument. We've set up our focus. And now let's go get the best quotes and the best paraphrasing. Everything needs to stay germane here for the line of reasoning. Immediately, Patrick displays his unyielding determination in acknowledging that Jessica asked him to stop writing these letters. Do you see how this quote aligns right here to the logical roadblock? So you have to teach students to quote with deliberation, and oftentimes we do quote finders in my class. It's kind of like a chalk talk, where we put the best quotes into the first premise, where I'll model and write the first premise and then have my students find the best quotes for it. So this takes practice. Another thing you'll notice is that my students have really silky smooth quote transitions. Part of it is they know how to bracket. That needs to be taught and modeled. You got to Bob Ross that. But I call it the 5-word rule. If you place a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keep the quote small, it should sound conversational. So we quoted, right? We made our promise. Let's go analyze. In spite of her expressed desire for the wooing to stop, Patrick succinctly admits that, but he can't, right? So I went logos, syntax. So I went logos, syntax, right? Line of reasoning. So check this out. Syntactically, the opening 3 lines, given their declarative nature, create his emotional desperation and justification for defying Jessica's wishes. So we're back to pathos, which we went to here. So tie it all together. His undying and burning love supersede what she does not know. They belong together. The manipulation of the ellipses and the bold underlining of let you go highlight this fact. But just to hammer home the point, He juxtaposes himself to Darth Vader while equating Jessica to Vader's son. So we got to get into the illusion, right? So kids can, got to just teeter-totter balance this, the quoting and the paraphrasing. So do you see how, there's this good blend of quoting and paraphrasing? So, and just small quotes. So students often take these huge, big, gargantuan quotes, and that's not diction analysis, that's quote dumping. So I like these small quotes. Despite the fact that Darth Vader is an evil Sith Lord, he did right to save his son, just as Jessica should do right and accept Patrick's argument. So we're breaking down the logos, right? That's Patrick's thinking. Little does Patrick know, however, that logically the correlation does not make much sense. The tone shifts dramatically as Patrick moves to the second paragraph to try a different rhetorical strategy in case his first effort fails. Still wielding the emotionally loaded, truncated sentence structure, he tells Jessica that she makes him feel so safe and so warm. So that 5-word rule again, bracket as needed, keep it conversational. And this is something else that's sophisticated that, a lot of teachers, when I work with them, they say they like. My students can quote multiple times in one single sentence in one fell swoop. To get the sophistication point, I think that's a skill that students need to be able to pull off, is to embed with complexity as well. It's all tied together. All right. But in his next move, Patrick makes things even more awkward by stating that he wants to crawl up inside Jessica. Perhaps not knowing the latent innuendo implied in the statement, Patrick qualifies with yet another allusion and states that it is like when Luke Skywalker crawled up inside his tauntaun to protect himself from the sub-zero temperatures of Hoth. So we got plenty of support here. It might even be a little too long. Probably didn't need to include the tone shift. I really want my students to cap it at 12. This one goes over a little bit. So if I were to revise this with the student, I would say get the tone shift out of there and save tone shift for the next paragraph, because in terms of the line of reasoning, you never mention tone here. So therefore, it should not be coming in here, right? So it's an umbrella concept. It's a promise. So at the conclusion, you got to tie it all back to the thesis, the prompt, keep the promise of the first premise. It just takes a couple of sentences. Despite the bumbling and awkward nature of Patrick's diction, he will not relent in trying to make the following point. Star Wars is really good, so therefore a relationship with Jessica would be equally good. While this is far from being a perfect syllogism, it shows the nobility of Patrick's efforts. So this is really well done. The line of reasoning stays really well intact. As I said already, I'd get the tone out of there. But if we go back here, did the student keep the promise of the first premise? Everything that's mentioned here, you have quotes and paraphrases in the second premise, mixed with support and analysis. And in the end, the handshake makes sense. It's all tied together. So that's how you would do a syllogistic body paragraph for this love letter. And students might ask, what do I do next? Well, it's simple. You're going to do another paragraph. Just change the term. So we know we still have tone to do. The juxtapositions could be explored a little bit more. There's anaphoras that still need to be explored. There's metaphors to be explored. So keep going. You have plenty of stuff to go. Change your quotes, change your paraphrases so as not to be redundant. Follow the exact same pattern. And that's how my students do it. So to wrap things up, know that my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind is now being run through the National Writing Project. As of August 9th, 2022, we're going to be running it through them, which is great news because teachers want and need their professional development hours. And it's a 10-hour stamp. You get a 10-hour badge for doing it. It's a 5-hour commitment. We meet one hour every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for 5 weeks. And then there's about an hour of outside work, so you get a 10-hour badge. So if you want more information on that, you can go to my webpage at teachinghowtowrite.com. I have information on there and my other PD offerings. If you're interested in these slides and want them for your classroom use, you can write to me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. And also know that I'm doing some webinars and some blogs for perfection learning this coming academic year. So look for me there. So a few irons in the fire, and should also say I didn't include it on this. I'll be presenting at the NCTE conference with Tim Freitas and Brandon Abden this coming fall in Anaheim, California. So busy, busy, busy. So if you want any of these slides material, give me a holler. Happy to send it your way. So for now, be well, happy teaching, and happy writing.